5 apocalypses that we survived. Number 5. The Dust Bowl. Lasting 8 years, the Dust Bowl was a severe drought in the 1930s, the roughest time of the Great Depression. It affected parts of Texas, Colorado, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, driving thousands from their states to seek a better life elsewhere. The combination of over-farming, reliance on a small number of crops, and lack of rainfall led to soil depletion, which turned normally fertile topsoil into fine particle dust. The storms kicked up by the prevailing west to east winds of the Great Plains caused dust clouds to bury entire towns in suffocating grit. But lest you think it was confined to the Midwest, on April 14, 1935, the dust storms were so massive that they blotted out the sun in several states, and ships in the Atlantic Ocean reported dust falling upon their decks. Ironically, a member of Franklin Roosevelt's cabinet was testifying before Congress on the need for soil conservation when the storm hit. He reportedly pointed out the window and stated, "This, gentlemen, is what I've been talking about." A combination of soil conservation laws and programs as well as rain finally returning to the Plains states in 1939 brought a close to what must have seemed like the end of days to many. Number 4. The Mongol Conquests. Ruthless and dispassionate, the Mongol hordes descended upon the societies of Asia and Europe like a force of nature. During the 13th century, Genghis Khan forged the many tribes and clans of the Central Asian steppes into an effective and devastating war machine, conquering China, the Middle East, Russia, and parts of Europe. That the Mongols killed many is not in doubt, but the exact number can be hard to pin down. Some regions such as China had excellent census figures, but other places did not. While we may not know exactly how many people perished as the hordes swept through Eurasia, we do know that there was a sudden drop-off in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, a drop-off that cannot be explained except by the deaths of millions of living, breathing animals. The Mongols, though, eventually lost momentum and fragmented. Their massive empire eventually fractured and dissolved, a mere 100 years after they started. Number 3. The Black Plague. Most people are aware of the massive, devastating plague known as the Black Death, which swept through Europe in the 14th century. It is reported to have killed around 50% of the European population. But what many people don't know is that the Black Death didn't just affect Europe but Africa, the Middle East, and Asia as well. The plague, caused mainly by the microbe Yersinia pestis, was phenomenally virulent. It spawned not just the plague itself but widespread panic and the rise of crazy superstitions, such as that the disease was caused by God's displeasure. The disease struck down the rich, poor, weak, powerful, pious, and heretical alike and led to massive social upheavals. The plague returned periodically afterward but lacked the impact of the 14th century outburst. Yet it still remains in our collective memory, albeit in the form of a poetic misconception, Ring Around the Rosie, which most people believe chronicles the stages the Black Death. On the contrary, this famous nursery rhyme appears to have no connection to the plague nor, indeed, any sinister origins at all. Number 2. Potato Famine. In the mid-19th century, the reliance of many working poor upon a single crop led to millions of deaths. Most people associate this disaster with Ireland, and they're partly right. Ireland did indeed have the most visible manifestation of the blight. But it was definitely not the only country to suffer. The blight actually struck most of northern and central Europe, including Scotland, where it was known as the Highland Blight or Highland Famine. The blight also affected Belgium and was devastating to the German economies, leading to near-total societal collapse as starving workers died in the streets of Europe. The tragedy was made worse by the fact that in many regions, such as in Ireland, there was more than enough food produced, but governments and merchants alike favored the profits made by selling grain and food overseas. Number 1. The 30 Years' War. Arguably the most famous of the religious wars of Europe, The 30 Years' War was a series of conflicts pitting one nation against another in an attempt to resolve several matters, including the primacy of Catholicism or Protestantism. Nearly every country in Europe participated in the wars, but the most devastating battles took place in the Holy Roman Empire of Central Europe. The very nature of the war, which combined political greed with religious obsession, meant that no side was willing to be merciful to the other. The result devastated dramatic cities and states, leaving many municipalities as ghost towns and harvests of staple grains reduced by up to 75%.